We are at FECCA 2024 in Brisbane, and today I have Giri Sivaraman, Race Discrimination Commissioner. It's a big job with a big mandate, and we're here to know a little bit more about what they do, what the connection to FECCA is. But first, I'll start with this. What are we not talking about when we're talking about race?
We're not talking about racism. This is a country where the person that calls out racism gets attacked more than the racism itself, unfortunately. So it's actually a very difficult environment in which to talk about race or racism. And that's in part, I think, because race and racism are not about biological or scientific constructs as people often think of them. They're about power and privilege. And so predominantly in this country, if you're white, it's the power and the privilege to know that institutions were built by people like you, for people like you. And as soon as someone starts talking about race and racism, they're attacking that power and they're seeking equity. And so people don't want to give up power very easily. And that's why I think it's really difficult to talk about race and racism, because of that underlying dynamic there.
There is the National Anti-Racism Framework that I think has been a passion project. Tell us a little bit more about that, and what that will mean in setting the conversation for perhaps the time ahead.
Yes, so this is a really important project that my team has been working on for about 2 years. Racism is such a systemic issue and it manifests in so many different ways that it takes a lot of effort and time to actually work out how it operates across our society. And the framework is a roadmap to government as to what questions they need to ask, what work they need to do to attack racism, particularly in a structural and systemic form. And the pillars on which the framework are built are firstly improving racial literacy. What I mean by that, which you probably understand, Nandini, but maybe not everyone does, is when you or I walk into a room, people automatically have assumptions about us because of the race that they can see. But what people don't understand more so is how an institution might operate in a particular way to disenfranchise someone by race. Why is it that some people have worse health outcomes based on race? Why are some people more overrepresented in the justice system? No race is inherently bad. So it's understanding how do structures and institutions disadvantage people of race. And then the roadmap is to say to government and to civic and corporate society, now is the time to take measures to deal with this racism that's inherent in our structures. We're giving you the roadmap. You've got to get in the car and start on the journey with us.
There's a lot of conversation when we talk about frameworks in who has had an input into that framework. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about the consultative process that led to that framework? And in your opinion, was there any group that you would have liked to engage with more, or where you think there is an opportunity to be more inclusive?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if you're going to fight racism, you have to have it as community-led or led by the people that are the victims of racism. Otherwise, you kind of just maintain it in that if you're just speaking down to people that experience racism, you're perpetuating that lack of power. And consultation was really extensive, I'm pleased to say. And we had 2 branches of consultation. We had First Nations consultation, because the experience of racism for First Nations people is unique. In this way, the racism someone like you or I might encounter is a denial of equity and respect. The racism a First Nations person encounters is a denial of equity and respect, but it is also a denial of sovereignty and self-determination. You, all of us that have settled here have benefited from the racism that allowed the dispossession of their land. So there is a difference.
Yes.
So we had racism with First Nations communities was really important, so we consulted with First Nations communities. That was very extensive. Every state and territory, remote regional communities, and that's going to be in a report that we release shortly. And then secondly, tomorrow at the FECCA conference, I will be releasing the FECCA consultations report, which was with non-First Nations racialised communities, which was also used to support the creation of the National Anti-Racism Framework. Could we have consulted with communities more? Look, it's hard to say. I think it was really important to not just talk to communities, but look at points of intersection, people that are young, women, LGBTIQA+, all the communities where, as you well know, when you've got multiple things which impact on the way in which you're treated, the sum is often greater than the parts, right?
Yes, yes.
And we did try and do that. And I think we did pretty well, to be honest, in terms of engagement with community. So I don't feel like there's any group that I wish I could have heard more from.
Sure.
And of course, one particular community that we did hear from, which would be relevant to the people watching this, is communities affected by caste-based racism. But I think it's pretty good, and I'm really looking forward to announcing the release of the report tomorrow.
Great, and I think there'll be a lot of interest in actually reading it, understanding it. One of the things I did want to ask you, that in Australia, in the last perhaps 5 or 10 years, there has been quite a shift in how racialized communities engage and are perceived, and world events have an impact. As you spoke about caste, there has been a greater understanding of caste discrimination. I work also with an organization called Hindus for Human Rights that talks about caste discrimination and wants to address it. How do you feel structurally some changes can be brought into systems where you're actively fighting caste discrimination, where there is such a strong sense of denial from within the Hindu community that it even exists?
Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, the starting point is building racial literacy, understanding how race might operate. And I should just make this one important point. My primary position in the work I've done is talking about how in this country it is whiteness that is the centre of power. And often when you find other forms of racism, say within communities that are not white, it's actually a case of your power is determined by your proximity to whiteness. The higher up you are within those sub-communities, the closer you are to being white, the more power you have, which actually does get reflected a bit in caste racism as well.
Yes.
And sometimes it's what little power you have, you try and hold on to by pushing other people out of that circle of power. So we should never forget how power and structures work. But in a sense, caste racism is the same. It's about power and privilege. When you're at the top of the tree, you get all the power and the privilege just by birthright. In terms of how do you educate, it's in partnering with organisations like the Humanism Project, who contributed to the scoping report for the National Anti-Racism Framework, and we're very grateful for their contribution. Raising awareness about the issue is a starting point, of course. Trying to collect data about how the racism manifests in various sectors is really important. And then trying to build in solutions based on the racial literacy and the data collection, and being area specific, whether it be health, education, workplaces, media, places of worship, which is a significant focus area for caste racism. I'm using the word caste racism because it's actually racism, not just discrimination.
Yes.
But, so I think those are some of the measures in which you deal with it.
So this is the long game, isn't it? Because there's so much work to be done in that space. And part of our work also involves talking to young people and having them more engaged in the political process, and also understanding some of these issues from a wider lens. And obviously one of the aspirations is to have people of color, to have people in positions where they are part of decision making. And therefore, since you are in such an important position, what is a pointer or some advice that you can provide young people who want to really make a difference and who are engaged with social justice? What pathways would you say there are in Australia right now that they can actually avail of to find a seat at the table with an empowered representation?
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? When I look at positions of power, politics, the public service, CEOs, boards, media, there's very few people that look like you and me. And then those of us that get to those positions of power and privilege, we shed ourselves of everything that makes us different: our language, our religion, our culture, our dress, everything but the colour of our skin, the one thing we cannot change, which means we're still subject to racism anyway. So it's, what I would say is we need to find a way where you can progress and be you. Don't be forced to completely assimilate so as to prosper and succeed, because that is how racism operates. It reduces you, it diminishes you.
Yes.
So all of us have left something behind. I mean, I was brought up in a Tamil-speaking household. It's a beautiful, beautiful language, as many of the people watching this would know.
Ancient language.
Ancient language. And I let it go because I didn't want to sound different. You know, the subject, verb and object are in different places compared to English. I didn't want to sound different. I relinquished my religion in part because there was no real basis for it in my day-to-day life. The only thing I clung on to is my vegetarianism, which is, you know, veganism was cool for a while there, so it was okay, but it seems to have gone out of vogue, so but I'm still holding on for dear life. So I would say for the young people, try and maintain your sense of identity and culture. Don't resist that urge to be diminished. And then look for areas of collaboration. And just remember, we are all in the same in the sense of those of us that are without power, whether it's due to disability, sexuality, gender, women. These things all intersect, and it means that my liberation is never achieved unless your liberation is achieved. When you're a woman, you would have encountered discrimination, sexism as a woman, and because you're brown, and those things compound in different ways. So you have experiences that I will never experience, and so unless your liberation is achieved, my liberation is not achieved. And in that sense, we have to actually try and work together and recognise that the underlying issue is the way in which power is maintained and exercised. There's lots and lots of opportunities to be involved in social justice. I think that's a wonderful thing about Australia. There's community legal centres if you're in the law, there's advocacy centres, there's many different ways, and often your community will have organisations like the Humanism Project or whatever it might be, whoever your community is.
Hindus for Human Rights.
Whoever it might be.
Yes, sure.
So try and engage with your communities too, I think. And it's a long, hard road.
Yes, and sometimes it is a little bit intimidating for someone who's not part of that system to even know, for instance, where FECCA sits, where ECCQ sits, where your organization sits, and how they sort of inform each other and where the opportunities may lie. So I think there is, in terms of literacy, I think there might be an opportunity, even in terms of opportunity literacy among diaspora communities. And thank you so much. I think it's been a really wonderful conversation, and I look forward to your session tomorrow.
Yeah, no problems. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.